How's it going? Welcome back to Dylan Pickups blog. So we had this whole thing for about a week going on about setups and anything from the truss rod adjustment to the saddle height and intonation and all this stuff. So we got a couple of questions that resulted from that from people asking about alternative setups, because I think a couple of people wrote, well, you're assuming that we want as low of action as possible, and we're using traditional tuning with traditional strings, but honestly, a lot of people are not doing that anymore. So let's talk about what we have to do when we change setups, when we have some non-traditional stuff going on. Basically, the long and the short answer of it is, if we go back to our string tension article, and we talk about how everything affects everything, remember that a longer scale length takes a higher string tension, okay? A higher pitch takes more string tension. So when we change any of that stuff, then we are going to change the setup of the guitar. The truss rod adjustment, when we tune from E down to E flat, theoretically what can happen is when that neck has some backbone in it, it can flatten out because we are relieving tension. Here's an interesting thing. If we take a 46 string, or 42, let's say 42 string for like a 9 set, a 9 to 42, and we just do nothing else. Let's talk about string tension for a minute. If we do nothing else, but we change this guitar from 9s to 10s, and this low E string goes from a 42 to a 46 or a 48, depending on the brand, usually a 46, you end up with about 4 more pounds of string tension just on this one string, okay? So what that means is the overall tension is going to be more on the neck. Now the interesting part about this is, so if we go from, let's say, 14-ish pounds to like 18.5 pounds, which is what it ends up being, from a 42 to a 48 or a 46, but then we go ahead and we tune this down half a step, we drop back down to right at where our 42 was, and sometimes even a little bit lower depending on the setup of the guitar. So if we did nothing else but took a set of 10s, tuned it down a half a step, we would have very similar to the string tension of a set of 9s. Okay, if that makes sense. So that will change your setup on your guitar, especially if you have a tremolo. Then you'll have to re-level a Floyd. Depending on how you have a Strat setup, if you have it locked down, it might not make much difference. But if you have it floating at all, it will change it, okay? So what will it change? Well, it will change basically just about everything, because when our back bow on our neck changes, then when we check our back bow, okay, and we go, let's say, from the first fret to the last fret like this, this is going to get smaller. This gap right here is going to get smaller. And then the other thing that will happen is our string height will actually fall, because now, it won't fall because the bridge did not move, but what will happen is, because the center of the neck will come up, basically, it will basically act like the bridge fell, okay? Because remember, all of our other adjustments are based on our truss rod adjustment. So if we lost tension by tuning it down, then that's exactly what would happen. Now, what if we go down a full step with these strings? It starts to get kind of floppy, right? If we go down a full step, not to mention if we go down to like C or something, then we end up going up to a lot heavier string. Well, just remember that so here's what happens is, a heavier string takes more string tension, obviously, to keep it at a particular pitch. But as we lower the note that we're tuned to, the string tension falls. There is a line that it crosses though, where if you keep the same weight of string, then the string tension will fall, it will fall, it will fall. And then if you bring the string weight up, so if you go from, let's say, a 46 to a 52, then that string tension starts to rise back up. So you can usually go down, like you could go down a whole step with 10s with no problem. A lot of people do, right? If you go much further than that, you'll see that your string tension will start to fall below what it is on a set of 9s. And if you've ever noticed, especially on something with a longer scale length, they start to get pretty floppy, okay? So anything below about a step, then it starts to get floppy. Well, some people like that. I actually have an artist that is out touring, and we built him a guitar, and he wanted to play with 10s. He wanted to tune it down a full step. A full step. And then he wanted to tune his low E down to a D from there, and he wanted to play with 10s. So here's what was happening. It was actually on, I was on a reverse peg head Telecaster. And so what was happening was this low E tension was falling so low that his low E was popping out. So here's where we come back to, well, the string should be halfway outside the nut and blah, 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 blah. You know, all those things that come down from grandfathers to grandsons about how your guitar is supposed to be set up. So literally what I had to do was design a nut that went up in an angle this way, and this low E had to stay all the way in the nut. And I had to cut the nut slots right so that it wouldn't bind, so that when he bent, especially with a reverse peg head, that string was sliding back and forth in there, it had to stay in tune. Because if you put string trees on the low E's, it won't work, because it'll grip in there and it won't tune, and it wouldn't work. So anything is possible, but you just have to be able to come up with some compromises. Nut setup is another thing. So once we've readjusted our truss rod, what if we went from a 46 to a 52? On a lot of nuts you can get away with maybe almost that much, but much more than that, and you're gonna have to start messing with the nut, because it's going to mess with your string height here, and it is also going to mess with the friction in the nut, because it's going to start gripping on the sides. So you'll have to start thinking about that. Your string height, when you put a heavier string on a guitar, depending on how you measure it, we talked about measuring from underneath it with a saddle height gauge. If you measured it that way and you measure it again with thicker strings on it, it probably won't change. If you measured it from the top at all, you have to compensate for the thickness of the string. So some gauges will measure to the top of the string, and you'll have to make sure that you compensate for that, because the string will be thicker. People overlook another thing. On a bridge such as this one, this is a wraparound, but a Tone Pro's, like a normal one in a Les Paul, is the same thing. These do have string grooves in them. So when you go up in your gauge on your string, they could bind here too. And people say, well, that doesn't really matter in a bridge. It does. We had a whole discussion on Facebook yesterday, again, about top wrapping. And one of the things that people do not realize is that when you stretch a string, when you bend a string, it stretches from its anchor point, not from the saddle. It stretches from its anchor point, which means this friction right here does matter, and the friction across the bridge does matter. So if you have a string that is too big for this groove, you will have tuning problems. So it's just like the nut. They need to be able, the thing needs to be able to move around in there, and the string height needs to be right. So if you go, up to a 58, because you're tuning way, way down, that string groove is going to be there, is going to have to be compensated for. So really, in short, if we're going to go to bigger strings, we need to pretty much start over. If we're going to tune down a half a step, or if we're going to tune down to if we're just going to basically like detune our low E, A lot of times tension, so let's just say it in grades like this. So let's say you're just going to play with this in a low E. Your low E is going to be tuned down to a D all the time. One thing you might want to do, depending on how high you're going to play on the fretboard, is just the lowering of the tension of the low E string is going to change your intonation just a little bit. Just because of the tension falls in that string. Even if you don't change strings, just if you lower this one, check your intonation again. Okay, and you can go back to our video and figure out how to do that. Now, if we go down a whole step, half step or a whole step, some guitars, it depends on the stability of the neck joint, it depends on the stability of the neck. This guitar right here, because of the way the neck is built and the neck joint is built, I can tune it down a whole step and it won't matter. The string tension will fall and you'll be able to feel it, and it will get a little bit floppy, but as far as staying in tune and stuff, and as far as the intonation being way off, and as far as the fretboard, as far as the neck relief changing, this guitar is really stable and it won't really move. Just because of the neck joint and the way the neck is made. It's like got carbon fiber in it and stuff, so it's really good. But depending on the stability of your guitar, even a whole step, just play it. Don't mess with anything, just play it. Unless you have a tremolo, you'll have to mess with it. But if it's a fixed bridge, just mess with it, play it, you know, see what's up. And if you feel like you have to mess with this, then do it. Anything beyond that, when we start changing string weights, we're gonna change our string tension a lot. Remember that you're dealing with, even one size of string, 4 pounds of string tension on one string. So, and like I said, as you start to go above 58, 56 on your low E, and you start to, it goes way up, but then if you tune it a whole step down, your tension goes way down and it almost meets in the middle. So there is a point there in the middle where you can tune it down to, and then raise your string size, and it will cross, and your setup won't change very much on your guitar, except for your nut depth and your saddle. Okay, so you'll just have to put strings on it, remeasure everything, and see how it feels. Again, we talked about the stability of the instrument. You might want to put it on there and just play it the way it is for a day or two and let everything kind of move around depending on what the weather's doing. Like I said, depends on the stability of the instrument. Okay. Now the other thing, there's a couple other types of stuff that we have not talked about. So this is one of our custom builds, and it has, I don't know if you can see that, I'll put it real close. It has a compensated nut on it. There are a couple of makers out there that make compensated nuts. This is a completely different way of setting intonation. It's pretty awesome, actually. And then this guitar actually has a roller bridge in it because of this whole patented design here. It's really cool. Roller bridges, when you measure them, you just have to make sure that you measure to the last point of contact. We talked about that. The friction is going to be different. You can't really file on a roller bridge, so you're going to have to pretty much live with string height the way it is. You know, and then this also has one of the wheels down at the bottom of the neck to be able to adjust your tension. So that's another kind of alternative setup. And then the other thing that comes up a lot, this is the only guitar I have set up for this right now, is one of our cigar boxes. But this guitar obviously is set up to play slide, okay? So the way this guitar is set up is where you would go for like 2 millimeters at, you know, the 17th fret. This guitar is like 2.5. And where you would go for 20 thousandths or less at the first fret for your nut action, this guitar is, I think, 35 thousandths. So it's a lot higher. You can still fret notes, you know, you can still play the thing. It's totally fine. It's a little bit higher than you would normally want. And, but you can play slide on it without, you know, grinding frets. Now the thing about that too is how good the guy is at playing slide will depend on how low you can go. I'm not very good, so having some room to be sloppy is cool. This particular guitar was out on tour with an artist for a while, and it has a brass nut in it, and he played slide on this guitar, but this guitar has really a conventional setup, and you would think, well, how can you even play it? It's just because he's really good. He just has a really light touch, and he was able to play slide on this thing. And this has a real flat, really flat neck. There's hardly any relief in the neck. And the string height at the 17th fret is really low. On some of our custom T-style builds, we put like 2 degrees of neck angle in here, even though it's a T-style, and it really helps us to be able to put that neck angle lower. So anyway, that's the thing. So some of these other styles of guitar playing are going to require different setups. So we're not saying that just because you play guitar means you're going to have your action as low as it possibly can go. In some of those setup videos last week, you know, it was just to show you what could be possible and how to get the most out of that, because a lot of players do want that. But I wanted to show you a couple of alternative setups and think about string tension. You're gonna pretty much have to start over if you go more than about a half a step or a full step, depending on the stability of the guitar. A lot of times you can get away with it, but just try it and see what you think. So anyway, I hope that helps out. This was just kind of a fun show and tell thing today to think about different possibilities. I know that there is a lot of like, this is how you're supposed to do it stuff on the internet, but honestly, it's your guitar and you're playing it. So when you play it and you say, I don't like how this feels, just change it. If you don't like the nut height of the low E string, don't make it so low. If your E string pops out, file it a little deeper, but make sure you have the friction right. You know, you can compensate for all that stuff. Even doesn't matter what it says in the book. You have to make it to where you can play it in the style of music that you want to play it in. That's really all it is. When we talk about our conventional setups and all of our standardized numbers that people think about, the 2 millimeters and the 10,000ths and the, you know, all that stuff, that's just a standard starting point. To tell you the truth, none of these guitars have that setup. None of them. Because they are used for all different purposes. So just think about that and have fun setting your guitars up, man. And I hope you enjoy playing. Thanks for stopping by.